When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadabji, your podcast host, a practicing clinical social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 42. Finding His Inner World, Now Grounded for Life. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing an awesome and daring guest, Peter Ratnikova. Peter is a serial entrepreneur and co-founder of 5+ companies. He has passion for entrepreneurship and since an early age has demonstrated that taking action is the only way to realize your dreams. Loyalty and perseverance are his main strengths, and he understands that the formula for success is a consistent effort over time. His mission is to shorten that length of time for everyone. As a millennial, he has spent the last 10 years immersed in complex internet-based technology solutions. He is excited about helping organizations to understand emerging technology trends and their potential for business transformation. In 2015, Peter discovered Bitcoin, immediately realizing the huge potential that this technology held. Since then, he has been on a mission to educate and inspire as many people as possible and is committed to put Canada at the center of this disruptive and innovative technology trend. Hi, Peter. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I'm really quite excited to have you on as a guest today on the show. I am also thankful for your willingness to share your story and for your support in taking a stance with me to help break barriers of mental stigma. So thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Awesome. So Peter, in case you're still wondering, this podcast is about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether it's directly about mental health or something else, whether it's a mental health struggle, whatever it may be. We know that no matter what a story is about, there is impact to one's own mental health in some way, and that typically remains tucked away. And so this platform that I have created here, the purpose here is for it to serve in a way to break those barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So our presence together, I'm really hoping, will be to encourage other people to come forward and share and tell what they usually have reservations for expressing. And so on that note, I am bringing forward a trend, and it's called the mental beauty rethink. What comes to mind when you hear the words mental beauty rethink?
A different way of using your brain to achieve maybe perspective or a certain purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That's the feeling I get from the statement.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the idea?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think people weren't even actively talking about physical health up until like a couple of decades ago. Like you had it always in a niche kind of market, and that got very trending the last, whatever, 20, 30 years. So we've just started touching on the mental health side of things. So we need as many trends, as many statements to go viral, or for people to like understand what that means to them. And I feel like the more we could get this out there, the faster we'll get to a place where it's very common to talk about, just like physical health or anything else we've been now more accustomed to sharing as a human species.
Hmm. And we really do need to have these conversations. So I really wanted to have a creative way to get people to talk about what often really doesn't get spoken about. So I'm getting a good vibe so far from the crowd and the audience and the guests up to date. So I'm just hoping that we're able to continue on this path. So I don't know about you, Peter, but I'm ready to get started. So I hope you are.
Of course.
Excellent. Okay, so my famous first question. Peter, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. What would it say?
It would say, make your decision from yourself and not from your surrounding environment.
Can you tell me more about that title?
The misconfusion in society and what it takes to really find yourself comes from deep within yourself and finding out what your balance and what your core beliefs are. Whereas a lot of people just kind of take what's around them and assume that's what's going to make them happy. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't even reach that level of success. So they're chasing it maybe most of their lives. And maybe by the time they reach it, they're almost out of energy and they realize, you know what, this actually isn't what makes me happy, right? So I think that this title is kind of just something to express the importance of not waiting and not having a checklist of things to accomplish before actually working and finding your true meaning, or your true, not even meaning is the right word, your true values in life.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you definitely knew where that statement was coming from. So I'm really glad that you shared that with us. So I'm really curious about what your untold story is all about. I know it's one of a spiritual journey. So if it's possible, let us in on the who's, the what's, the when's, the where's, how it began.
Yeah, so from a young age, it was I was kind of more of like a jock and grew up in a neighborhood where it was kind of urban, and so that's kind of the environment that I came up in. And rappers and like athletes, unfortunately, are the role models in those kind of communities, which is not unfortunate. I mean, it's a very small percentage of people in that society that actually make it. The amount of rappers, and there's only about 1,000 or 600 NBA players. There's only a couple thousand players that play in the NFL, right? So it's great to achieve and maybe get schooling and other things out of it, but that's never been like, you go to other communities now that I've seen other cultures. It was like instilled that if you do sports, the ultimate goal isn't to become a professional athlete. If you get free schooling out of it and then you apply yourself and whatever you find or love to do in the schooling, that could set you up for life. That wasn't kind of the culture I grew up in. So
Okay.
that's why I got into business and sales very young. And that's what drove me for a very long time. And it wasn't until in my adult life, I started like having different conversations with people. And like my first time actually dipping into meditation was one and done at like probably 22, 20, somewhere like at a early age. I had a friend
Mm.
that grew up kind of more spiritual, for the better sake of the word. His family was into meditation and different forms of scriptures and kind of alternate lifestyle. So that was the one time I had a great experience. Like I had to turn off all the lights, and it was probably the corniest meditation experience you could imagine. I had to like block everything. I set up like a fort in my bed, and I thought I meditated for like 12 to 20 minutes. And when I was done, it was closer to an hour. So that experience kind of dipped my toe into it. And around those times, I was watching documentaries like about what's happening to the planet and the effects of what we're doing to the animals that we consume. But again, playing like semi-professional and playing like higher levels of American football at the time, and kind of being back to the environment of being around a bunch of jocks and being like meat eaters, and like you just live up to the stereotype you're kind of around. And so I kind of was like opening my mind and taking information from those places, but I wasn't really applying close to none of it. And then something just just hit me at one point, and like I had another friend going through some mental health issues, and
Mm-hmm.
he was like teaching me like like things he was learning. He was recommending I go see a shrink just because he thought it was doing like such great things for him. So I didn't go as far as at that moment to go there, but I did like accept this challenge. Like he showed me a video of like a spiritual guy, like Infinite Waters is his YouTube name, and it was like he called it the 1 week vegan challenge, right? And
Okay.
from going from just eating literally double Big Macs with bacon on it, sometimes twice a day,
Mm-hmm.
to all of a sudden doing something like the vegan challenge. Is probably about 25 years old now. That was probably the real start to the journey that obviously your whole life brings you up to a moment, but that's when I actively like was the first challenge I took. And that year there was it lasted much longer than a week. I think I went like 2 3 weeks, and then I'll jump on and off meat for that calendar year. And then by the end of it, the day before I turned 26 was the last time I consumed a piece of meat intentionally. Like I'm sure it happens in some foods, but I mean, like consciously actually ate it. I got to a place where I was probably better financially than I'd been ever before, or on the doorstep of it at the time. And so now I had more time to kind of self reflect, do this meditation. I got into fasting, these diets, and that kind of opened my journey to where we could go in more details in a sec of actually realizing that the materialistic things I've worked for to get to that moment, now actually connecting more to myself, that wasn't the most important thing. Whereas like up until that moment, to that, let's say 1 week vegan challenge, I would have said the most important thing for me is having a nice vehicle, nice place, nice clothes, like being able to travel, like all these external things were my top priority. Those are, if we got in the conversation, would be the business I'm building or the next venture, the next step. It was always about doing more. And all of a
Right.
sudden, now getting into fasting and meditation and a more simple diet, it's actually doing less.
The process of disruption, right? Of less is more and focusing on simple things that need to be adjusted.
Exactly.
Right. So I know you mentioned a few moments ago how, you had friends who were going through some mental health challenges and they would share with you what they were trying and making some recommendations, and that kind of opened your eyes into meditating or looking at some of the YouTube channels or finding different things that led you on your spiritual path. I'm curious if there was something before that. Like, was there something that kind of made you recognize, I need to do something different, or something that sparked the idea of entering on this journey?
I think it was just a compound of little things over time. That's why I mentioned the
Hmm.
story of the one meditation, watching documentaries. They would hurt me and I would feel it. And like
Hmm.
for like 12 minutes, I'd be like, yeah, maybe it's not a good idea to eat meat. And then I would go
Right.
order a pepperoni pizza or something. So
Right.
I think it was like a compound of many little things. And then actually, like, once I like put my mind that I'm going to do something, I usually take massive action. So I think it was just kind of observation until to the point where I decided, you know what? Let me take some massive action on this. Not to say at that point I thought I was going to be doing it the rest of my life or something that's going to be a new part of me, but I give everything a fair shot. And if it's not meant to be after 18 months or 3 years, it's not meant to be, right? But I want to at least give it that fair chance. And I think
Hmm.
once I got to dove into it, I didn't, I never would have like, there's a lot of things I would have assumed about my life. Just like if you asked me like my 10, 20 year projections and what I think was going to happen, this would not be in it whatsoever at most of my time growing up.
Right. So, I mean, a lot of things have changed for you, right? Like a lot of things were changing for you when you embarked on this path. I'm wondering if there was, like, was there a pain point? Like, was there something that you experienced from the place of suffering? Like, I think I hear when you're saying, like, you were starting to expose yourself to the documentaries and the videos, and you were starting to observe different things, and then slowly, slowly, gradually, with that compound effect, you made these deliberate choices. But was there anything that you experienced that was difficult for you, or any cumulative experiences that were complex that sort of led you to sort of even consider this path of watching the documentaries and exposing yourself to things that were different than what you were doing?
Well, I think I always like intuitively knew that there's like something. I think everybody has a path that they can take that can make a great influence, and whether that be just to your surrounding friends and family, whether it be much greater. or just even the plants and nature around you, there's definitely something people could find. So I think that like before I got to that point where I started realizing what that potentially could be to me, where I was kind of living false illusions in the sense of chasing the materialistic, the more ego based things, I would realize that, you know what, I don't find my past. So I use like alcohol as a drowning tool to like, I was always grateful in the sense of some people use alcohol and they get to a bad place. I just
Mhm.
get to worst case, a silly smiling place, and I'll leave venues like not remembering at times and come back and people are like, oh no, you were so nice, right? So I kind of let it get probably further than it would have been. That also probably helps too, right? In the sense of when you're watching these documentaries at the start, this and that, but you know, you're just going to pollute your brain with massive amounts of alcohol right after, or like later that day or later that week, whatever the case may be. It's kind of like easy to drown it out. So part of like the challenges when I wasn't just a diet, I actually went off alcohol for 6 months cold turkey. And again, being the jock that drinks beers and does shots and has a party house, like I DJ'd full time for many years as well. So I had this
Mhm.
very, very heavy set party reputation.
Mhm.
So that's when I really like my mind, I guess, started going different places. And like, I'm probably like the most, I don't know if I got a boost of estrogen in me or like, it was like, I was crying for no reasons when I was getting to like those meditations. And that was like probably the start of like where like I realized mentally I didn't work on my mind in the sense of connecting it to my body and what it means to me most of my life. I just achieved the checklist of things, and that was always like some things, you know, I put on the checklist, and I would achieve them. Some things I wouldn't, but that was always kind of my priority scale. So when I came off of that and I came on a cleanse, and like I mentioned, it was fasting, it was meditation, there was a
Mhm.
lot of things at
Mhm.
the same time, a different diet. All of a sudden, my mind was in a complete different place. And the things that I thought that were going to make me happy, all of a sudden I started questioning very deeply. And
Right.
that's kind of what got me to the point where I was like, you know what? Like, what does happiness really mean to me? And
Mhm.
it was a struggle for that period of time. It wasn't like it seems now, like many years later, that it kind of was like a quick phase. But in the moment, when you're confused, then you get to the point where you're actually down and like, you know, people don't recognize you and you don't want to do the things that always used to make me smile because you're not even sure what the things that make you smile anymore was. You,
Mhm.
that was probably the start to the place before it led. And I believe you have to have the ups and downs. Sometimes you got to go through the dark to appreciate the
Mhm.
light. And I've been
Mhm.
very blessed to be what I believe is happy most of my life, maybe happy for the wrong things in my perspective now, but that's the journey I have to go through to have the understanding I do this moment.
Right. And what kinds of things were going through your mind when you mentioned just now that sometimes there came a time where you weren't sure what was going to make you smile anymore? What kinds of things were you experiencing at that time?
There was just a lot of confusion, right? And even like great relationships that I have that are all in a different amazing place now. But at that moment, it was like, do people like me because I have a full bar and I have access to nightclubs? Do people like me because people started being around me less when I started drinking, right? So my
Mhm.
core friends would come by. And I understand why they weren't there as much too. It wasn't just the no drinking. Some of my friends don't even drink. It was just I was in this weird place and doing things they weren't used to. And they'll still come. They used to come by several times a week. Now they come by once or twice a month. So I went from having like the most social house to all of a sudden kind of like crickets in my place. And it was, yeah, it was a challenging time in the moment because now you're questioning yourself, you're questioning your friendships, you're questioning like life as a whole in the sense of what does it really mean, right? Like,
Mhm.
and it was definitely a challenge at the time, but it was it was good. It was also a cleansing too, because I'm sure there was people that were in the category I mentioned, right? The people that
Mhm.
I'm thinking about right now in the moment that are still around in my life, but there probably was a washing of I don't know whatever percentage or whatever number of people that they're not even my conscious. I don't even think about it anymore. That was probably some kind of cleanse that needed to go through as well, because there probably was X amount of people that were not genuinely in it for my well-being. They were in it for their own kind of personal reasons, and
Right.
it's not necessarily a negative thing. It was something that I believe was just meant to happen.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I hear how the confusion can show up and when self-doubt and questioning yourself and getting curious about people's intentions and your intentions and really understanding what's actually good for you? And are you just following a trend? Or am I just doing what I'm supposed to do because people say this is the thing to do? Or, you get caught up in all of that. It can be difficult to really connect back to yourself. So I was hearing quite a bit of your journey was finding a way to connect back to yourself, to be able to ask yourself these questions and really give yourself an opportunity to hear what the answers would be and to really find out what those things look like if they weren't what you were already doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you can share about how you were affected having gone through this spiritual journey, or the preamble to the spiritual journey, or anything along the path?
Yeah. So what I would say was like when I started kind of going through like the path of like, let's say when I got to the darkest moment where I was literally like, I don't know if it was 3 days or 3 weeks. It seemed like a eternity in the moment. But
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
going back now, there was a point I was in bed, like depressed, didn't want to get out. And like I mentioned, like this was the first time in my life I didn't live in like a co-op or government housing. Like I lived on my own from very young, from 18, but now
mm-hmm,
I'm about what, 26, 27, and I just got my first condo, and it's a beautiful place, and there's a water fountain when I walk in, and a gym and a conference room and a steam room that nobody used in the gym except me for some reason. So I felt like I had a private steam room in my condo.
right.
So it was like I had that. I had the Mercedes in the driveway. I had the beautiful fiance. I had the nice clothes. I had the people and the contacts to go and have a good time. And it's like that's what most people, especially at that age, are would love to have and are chasing. And the dream is like, oh, if I make 100,000 this month or $1 million this year, this is what I would want to achieve. I feel like I got to that point, and that's kind of where I realized, okay, like this is not necessarily what happiness is. And
Mm-hmm,
at the time, what I always did, because I've gone through financial hardships, even though I've done very well financially from a young age, there was
mm-hmm,
times where I had to balance myself. Because when you make, let's say, 6 figures plus, and you're used to spending that, and the following year you have a bad year, which could still mean whatever 40, 50,000, which somebody else could be a average good year. But when you're used to spending 3 times that, right, all of a sudden you have to change certain things about yourself. So I learned to from like probably like a young adulthood to if I'm low on my last resources, money, whatever you want to call it, I would literally give away half and buy
mm-hmm,
books with the other half. Because what somebody that usually doesn't have lots of financial resources usually has lots of time. It's very
right.
rare that someone like that's one or the other, and people that have both, it's amazing. But it's very rare for someone that doesn't have any resources. They usually have time because if you were so busy working, right? And I'm talking about G20 countries, right? I know there's a lot of places of the world, this statement might not apply, but I mean, for the places that we're currently talking and living at, if you're working hard, you should have some resources, right? There's no way you're going to have none. So that was kind of like what grounded me before. And then what I ended up finding through also, which was I went back to my strategy and I went back to giving and I went to buying more books. But this time, instead of like sales and entrepreneurship books and the books I would always buy before, because before it was always about just getting ahead financially or getting ahead materialistically. Now I was buying a different kind of book. And then I was listening to different kind of podcasts. And
Mm-hmm,
this I started with just like connecting with certain like people like you would, like whether it be in business, whether it be in my spiritual journey, I started connecting with certain teachers. And
mm-hmm,
then there's a book called Miracle Morning. I actually met the gentleman in person at a conference. So he
mm-hmm,
did all like I was already doing like I think he had 7 or 10 things, whatever, I forgot how many it was, but I was doing I think 75%. There's a few things I was missing, and one of them was like a gratitude journal every day when you woke up. So that's one of the things I applied right away in that gratitude journal, though, even I extended it to my own twist where I started taking, it was a handful of other people's beliefs that I strongly connected with.
mm-hmm,
And it started with that. And then it got to the point where I added 3 more of my beliefs that ended up kind of this what we talked about grounding myself and finding my inner self. And I'm saying it very quickly, but this took a matter of like several months, if not maybe even a
mm-hmm,
couple of years, right?
mm-hmm,
So it got to
mm-hmm,
the point where I was writing like a full page, like the starts with like half the page or 2/3 of the page was my daily, just to get the habit of writing going, my 5 purposes that are my new purposes at the time, right? It kind of had to be developed. And the whole last third of the page, I would just write things I'm grateful for. And it would literally start with things like having air to breathe and having the basic health and having a shelter at the moment and having electricity and living in this era. And, it
mm-hmm,
didn't have to be like the things that I still have them to this day, of course. It wasn't like oh, I'm grateful I have like materialistic things. All of a sudden, it started being gratitude for a complete different kind of lifestyle. Like I get kind of, again, you see when I say I do something, I kind of get obsessive with it or I take massive action. So for over 3 years, I think it was 3.5 years, no matter what country I was traveling at the time to, no matter what country I was and what I was doing, I didn't miss a meditation. I didn't miss a gratitude journal. And I literally have like 3 binders full of like, like it starts off, the first binder has like different purposes, but the last 2 binders is pretty much the same 8 purposes and
Mm-hmm.
variations of the same gratitude. Almost
Mm-hmm.
every day I had to instill it in me. And now like back then I had to like sit kind of like corny with my legs crossed and typical meditation stance. But like reading Eckhart Tolle and seeing him live and having other teachers as well break down the importance of like being present all the time and not just being present in that one meditation you do for 24 minutes or an hour.
Right.
It's actually living present moment awareness and being kind of conscious at all times. So that's, those are the things that ended up resonating with me very, very like deeply. And to this day, like when I wake up, the first thing I'm like, whoa, I have another day at this place. I'm breathing air. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
and it's massive gratitude. And I think that was the
Mm-hmm.
major change.
You had more awareness. You built that awareness sort of got ignited for you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after the self realization, those are the kind of, that's kind of to this day what keeps me like grounded or very happy and smiling on a daily basis. And it's like, yeah, whether I have a Mercedes on the driveway or no car, or like a friend could pick me up in his like, busted down Civic and I have a ride. Like I'm grateful for that. It doesn't have to be like
Mm-hmm.
these massive accomplishments to for gratitude. And that way you're
Mm-hmm.
also on a journey of enjoying every moment instead of thinking that, when you have this car or this place or when you reach this level in your relationship or
Mm-hmm.
external parameters. And eventually, if you hit all of them, you'll be surprised that happiness doesn't mean like the goals that you set achieved. Like that is a form of happiness in your path potentially, but it's not guaranteed. And
I think you're talking about that happiness from within, right? So it's that genuine state of like feeling full, feeling good, feeling abundant.
yes, exactly. And I believe that, that is like not having your cup grow or like having your cup expand.
Mhm,
That's how it happens with gratitude and love. It doesn't
mhm,
happen by like hitting your head against the wall or running around with the chicken with its head cut off, working hard, like running on the rat race.
mhm.
That's not actually the way to get ahead from what made me personally internally happy and living my best life is actually more actually simplifying it and finding what really makes you happy. Like for example, for the people that are not financially wealthy, it's like, well, let's say you got your goal. So you have your mansion in whatever part of the world. You could fly there on a private jet. What do you do when you get there?
Right.
Right? Do you go for a walk? Do you read a
Mhm,
book? Do you go to a nightclub? Do you go
mhm.
dancing? Do you go? And once you like pinpoint that, you come to realize you could probably do that now. Like you don't need to wait to have some
Right.
extravagant materialistic things. You could like live your best moments already right now. And yes, you can make them more comfortable with more financial gain or more resources. But at the end of the day, you could most likely do the things that make you smile every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also this idea, this extension of this idea from what you've been sharing. It's not really about what happens when you get there. It's also about the process, right? So it's not about the end game. It's about what's happening in the here and now, what's happening in the present moment, and what's happening along the way that we need to pay attention for as well.
Yeah, 100%.
hmm So, Peter, when people come to see me in the therapy space, people are typically in one of three places. Sometimes people are getting started on their journey, trying to figure out what they need to work on or where they need to start. Some people are in the middle, right in the thick of things, and they need help with that navigation. And some people are looking back, either trying to create some sort of closure, make sense of things, or find a way to put things in perspective so that they can move forward. What part of the journey would you say that you're in? Would you say that you're at the beginning, in the middle, or looking back?
I think it's all a perspective, right? So I believe that,
For yourself. For
yeah,
yourself. Yeah. Yeah.
myself, I think I'm in the last chapter, but I'm
hmm
open in certain situations and certain circumstances, knowing that there's always new journeys, new chapters within. Even though I might be on the final stage, there's always going to be new paths and new things that are unknown to me, and they're going to still kind of apply the first and second bracket of it. Even though I
Mhm.
believe I'm living in the third bracket, I'm not closed off to think that there's not things that enter my life that bring me back to moments of the first and second, and bring my way back to getting like any new challenge. It's just natural to have to go through that whole process. But I believe as a in general, as a mental like health journey, or as a whatever, as a human being journey, I do believe that I'm on kind of the final chapter of just kind of working out kind of the nicks and finding the last little, like where I fit in.
Right. Okay. So I'm curious. I mean, I'm always curious about everyone's stories when they're sharing with me. And for what I'm hearing you share, I guess I'm curious about how your untold story has affected your mental health specifically. Like I know you mentioned that, there was this darkest moment that you lived where you were feeling depressed and you couldn't get up and it felt like it was lasting a long time and there were definitely hardships that you had gone through even when things did go well. I'm wondering if you can expand or elaborate on that time, on how else you were impacted, like what emotions do you recall experiencing, or what toll did those dark moments take on your mind, or anything that you're able to share?
Yeah, it was something so different. Whereas like somebody that played American football and rode motorcycles, like got in motorcycle accidents and gotten pretty bad injuries from contact sports, I was very good with physical pain. And I had a very high pain tolerance, in my opinion, at that time. But this was and even when it came to like emotional things like relationships with women and ladies, like I got I went through a lot of experiences young, and I had my own shields put up for everything. And I thought I was like a very well guarded person. So when it hit me mentally inside, and it was like a hurting from the inside, and it wasn't a physical pain. It was a different kind of pain that I've never experienced before. It was very it was like an inner, it almost like have you ever an intuition feeling, like you have like a feeling in your gut, or like it could be good or bad. Sometimes you're walking down like a place, you got kind of like dark lights catch you, and you don't feel well. That's kind of like natural, but like what I explained, it was like that times 100. Like it was that like fearful feelings, and my body was kind of entrenched in fear, and it was like this
Hmm.
unusual pain because like I could still technically go to the gym, I could still lift weights, or I was a big strong man, but it was like I felt so weak from the inside that to that outside my body was almost useless. It didn't matter how much muscles I had on my body, or
Hmm.
how much whatever I achieved in life at that moment. It was like, wow, this is just literally shutting me down to the point where I'm literally don't know what to do with my own physical body because of what's happening inside my mind.
Hmm. So it kind of really took over a toll on your strength and your ability to feel strong as well.
Yeah, and like again, it was one of those things where before finding what like made me happy, this and that, before it'd be like again, like I thought that it was the drinking that would be going to the nightclub. I couldn't go to a nightclub if I wasn't drinking, because I wasn't drinking at that moment. But then like shortly after, as like I started coming out of this and taking more action, I found there was day parties that were like called Daybreaker, right? I went to a conference and I seen them. So they're like kind of hippie parties that happen at nightclubs at like 6 a.m. till noon, and there's no alcohol involved. There's just people like dancing and enjoying themselves. So you start finding niches and places that like kind of make you feel more like normal, grounded, balanced, as opposed to like you were thinking that, wow, like, am I the only one going through this, right? And I think
Right.
that that's what's happening more and more now, where that's why we're having this conversation, is for people to
Hmm.
feel more comfortable and to open up and realize, you know what, this is more common than less common. This is not, you're not alone out here on an island.
Hmm.
Like this is actually like happening to most human beings. So whether it be at all times or some point, like, and if they don't know, if it didn't happen to them directly, I'm sure they have a family member, a friend, somebody that is going through it. So it's impacted in everybody's life 1 or 2 degrees, if not literally inside themselves.
Right. Peter, I'm really curious. What are your key messages to the listeners of the show? What do you want them to know?
I want them to know to take the time, and it doesn't have to be like some massive amount of time, but like whether it be an hour a day, whether it be a week or a month retreat, just find a quiet time to really reflect about yourself and how you feel. And again, like, it doesn't have to be gratitude, it doesn't have to be goal oriented, it doesn't, like, there's no exact, like, because I share the path that worked for me is not going to be the
Mm-hmm.
path that works for most people. But there is some kind of tool out there, there is some kind of exercise, right? Like somebody else, like, I like maybe meditating with my legs crossed, sitting there with a certain kind of music, but somebody else it might be walking in nature, to somebody else it might be reading a book, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, find what that is in your life that settles your energy or your vibration and helps you understand yourself. And that's the message that I think, instead of always working on the externals that most people in society kind of pressure us to do, like at all times, or whether it be likes with the social media, and now you get advertisements to buy this. We're in holiday season right now, so everybody's thinking about materialistic gifts. It's like, you could like write somebody like a loving letter or make them something that could be way more meaningful than going and buying something at the store for $20 to $200 that they may or may not never use, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that finding your, like, whatever, your 1 hour a day or your 1 week of the year to actually reflect about, like, what are the things that are important to you. And if everybody just did that, that would be a lot further progression of understanding, and these conversations would become more and more common because people would be like, oh yeah, when I self-reflect, this is the kind of things that I feel, you know. And then it would become a more common conversation, instead of just talking about sports, weather, concerts coming up. You know what I mean? Like, let's talk about
Mm-hmm.
ideas and
Mm-hmm.
concepts. And how do you
Mm-hmm.
talk about ideas and concepts is, you have to have your own ideas and concept and not just regurgitate what the media or people around you are projecting to you, right? So how do you come
Mm-hmm.
up with these independent ideas? Well, self-reflection and independent thought.
Absolutely. I second that for sure. And I really like your message about, really focusing on the internal and less on the external. And your independent thought is a great starting point for you to share your ideas and really express your true self. So, very great messages. Thank you. So, what would you say is that game changing experience or inspiration that's close to you that really reflects your untold story? I know that you've shared that there were a couple of things along the way that came up for you that was really helpful or inspirational that anchored you to move forward. But what would you say was the most inspirational? Was there a quote? Was it a book? Was it a person, an event? What was that for you?
Yeah, it was a gentleman named Stuart Wilde.
Stuart Wilde.
He was the first spiritual teacher I've seen making kind of jokes about still getting drunk and enjoying his life, and into business and sales, and how it's still important, but like how was he was obsessive with it.
This was really down to earth and real life struggles and just real life joking and but bringing it back.
Yeah, and like, he was like dropping jokes in the presentation, and it was like a wealth conference, but it was so spiritual. So that's kind of, I've watched that many many times, and then I guess I got into, like, he only had a few videos on film on YouTube at the time. So after watching his little presentation, let's say that was only about 30 minutes or so, a bunch of times, and watching his other two, three things a few times, and then connecting with him, I ended up coming across this just audio tape. The other ones were visual. This was just audio.
Hmm.
And so I listened to the whole, like, it was one of those days I was fasting and meditating. So I listened to the whole thing. So at the end of the 5.5 hour tape, it was kind of like self help, spiritual dash business, kind of why I think I connected
Hmm.
with him. And at the end of it, he kind of challenged to go through this guided meditation. And
Hmm.
I've already committed 5.5 hours listening to this guy that day. I was like, well, what's another 30 minutes of going through this, right? Just the way he went through the meditation. There's a moment I just remember, he was like, like, you're visualizing walking through a forest, and now all the, like, weeds and branches are like part of you sticking to you, and you have to, like, break free. It was a kind of like a, I don't know, it was a very powerful guided meditation. And that, from that day on, I meditated every day of my life. And then I got into, like, eventually, like, buying probably every book. At one point I had like a book. He had a tiny book. It was one of his early books called Silent Power. It was like
Okay.
100 pages.
Hmm.
I carried that book to at least like 15 to 20 countries.
Well, you were inspired by his work and his legacy and what he left behind to teach you, right? And what he was able to inspire you to get back and connected to. So that's pretty amazing. And so, what would be a cause or an organization that has been impactful to you on your journey that you would like to give a shout out to?
Well, I gotta like why people misunderstand why I'm excessively passionate, especially this word is very trending and controversial in some settings, Bitcoin. But it's not
Mm-hmm.
about Bitcoin. It's about decentralized blockchain technology and
Mm-hmm.
peer-to-peer interactions. As a person that's traveled to some places that are not well off like we are in North America and other countries, like I've been to some slums and it's amazing that we have the internet and that I could, if they have Facebook, I could connect with them on Facebook, but that's still very limiting. We can't actually interact on a financial level. Like if I had a great day here in North America and I made $1,000 in a day, like why can't I just send my buddy 10 cents or $10 without it being complicated in a different part of the world where I know his whole family could eat like a lobster meal and like, like have a time of their night for what we couldn't even buy a fast food meal these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm very passionate about this technology of what it could do to the average person. So
Mm-hmm.
anyone that I'd like to preach is don't look at Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as a way to get rich. Look at it as a technology that could help people around this planet, especially the people that need it the most. So as someone that's privileged to live in this place where you're in that 1.5 to 3 billion people with modern banking, you don't need to learn this technology. But if you do, you could help change lives around the world without even knowing it, just by being a leader, being ahead. And
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, when you do go on your little vacation and you get along with the server or the waitress or whatever, your cleaning lady, that's thing, you could actually potentially change their lives forever with this technology.
I mean, it definitely sounds eye-opening because you're talking about it from an angle of a way to help people that would otherwise not be able to get the help. And it's about distribution of resources. And we all have enough, and we all can have enough if we share the resources, right? So I really like the spin that you're putting on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So, Peter, how can people connect with you if they would like to? What platforms are you findable on?
So like my government name is Peter, last name Ratnikov. So I'm on I have Facebook, but I would say I use my email directly is my name at the email. I also have a .com on the platform. I have a Twitter, I have a Facebook, I have a LinkedIn, and I also have a different handle. My DJ handle is still my handle for Instagram for the younger people. It's DJ Peasy with 4 E's. So for the people that are more kind of in Toronto and want to get kind of on the social side of things,
Mm-hmm.
probably Instagram is the best way to get a hold of me.
Well, that's perfect. We'll make sure we get all the handles from you so that we could post it on the show notes page so people will have options of how to get in touch with you. So we've got email, your website, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, IG. We've got the works. Perfect. So Peter, guess what? You have just dared yourself to share. Congratulations. How was the experience to share, Peter?
It was awesome. It was great to talk about something besides just Bitcoin or cryptocurrency for a whole hour. So it was nice to
Mhm.
actually dive deep into something more meaningful in the longer scheme of things or more relatable to the average person. So it was very nice to share and be able to just unload like my feelings. So I'm very grateful for anyone that tunes in and listens and any tidbit you can learn or apply in your life. I'm super grateful for. And yeah, it was just awesome.
Mhm. That's really great to hear, and I'm actually really grateful to have witnessed the sharing of yours. And your story has so many like multi levels, and the knowledge and experience that you were able to bring forward is just amazing. And it's just refreshing to see what the journey has been like for your success of who you've become today, and this idea of like remembering of where you came from and where you want to go and where you're going. So this clarity is so critical to keep in the forefront of your mind. And I am certain that definitely it's going to be a wonderful reminder for all of the listeners of the show. So thank you for allowing this conversation to happen and for all of your sharing.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Once again, Peter, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.